Yeah, so welcome everybody to Radical Feminist Perspectives. We're going to hear about the book Delusions of Gender by Cordelia Fine and discussed by Marian Rutigliano. So over to you, Marian.
Good morning. This is the book published in 2010, Delusions of Gender, How Our Minds, Society, and Neurosexism Create Difference. This is a bit of a departure. This is not a radical feminist book, and I have no idea whether she's a radical feminist. But in discussing how we apply a radical feminist analysis to the damage that gender is doing to women, um, a lot of things come up that um, that she raises in this book, and a lot of misinformation is promulgated in the name of gender. If you take home nothing from this book other than the fundamental principle of it is that hardwired differences between men's and women's brain is a myth. Hardwired differences between men's and women's brains is a myth. I don't want this to seem like a classroom, but she discusses a lot of studies, which I'll talk about. But but it'll be fun. I mean, there's no tests, no quizzes or anything like that. And this is stuff that you kind of look at and you're like, huh, I didn't know that. Huh, how about that? Um, in terms of the hardwired differences, what that means is that people who think that it is innate for men to lack or be reluctant to feel or show empathy, and that they can't tell what others are feeling because of testosterone or male neurons or a male brain, and that women naturally express empathy and innately read cues, faces, tone of voice for emotional nuance because of built-in capacities in a female brain. That's not true. One of the things she starts with is, discussing the stuff that came from a book called The Essential Difference by a guy named Sacha Baron Cohen, who really is one of the people saying that no, it's all innate. People point to their kids being different from birth, if they're boys versus girls. And this is a widespread opinion, but Delusions of Gender takes a closer look. And some people say, well, there's brain scans that show that things are different. And she talks about why a lot of those brain scans are misinterpreted. Claims about brain sex differences, even by some so-called experts, are simply uh, coding old-fashioned stereotypes with a veneer of scientific credibility. You hear the term, and we get accused of bioessentialism. The gender ideologues will say, well, it's bioessential to just think that male means having XY and being born with a penis, and being female is XX, born with a vagina. No, that's not what bioessentialism is. The gender ideologues are bioessentialists in saying that they have, a man saying he has a woman's soul, a woman's brain, or a woman's identity. But some of us can be bioessentialist as well by saying that, well, women are hardwired for nurturing, wanting kids, taking care of the house, and men are hardwired for domination, competition, and logic. Um, she this is actually pretty easy to read. So again, classroom, but fun. Um, the the list, of like those traits, for for women at least, are compassionate, loves children, dependent, interpersonally sensitive, nurturing, which are ideal qualifications, you will note, for someone who wishes to live to serve the needs of others. On the other hand, men would be described as a leader, aggressive, ambitious, analytical, competitive, dominant, independent, and individualistic, which are the perfect traits for bending the world to your command and earning a wage for it. And even if you don't personally subscribe to these stereotypes, there may be a part of your mind that really isn't so choosy. The psychologists and neuroscientists who study this are finding that what we consciously say about ourselves really does not tell the whole story. Stereotypes, as well as attitudes, goals, and identity, also appear to exist at an implicit level and operate without the encumbrances of awareness, intention, and control. And that's what implicit means, is that we just think that, well, this is the way it is because this is the way it is, and this is the way it is. Researchers have tested for these implicit associations. For example, first people are given tests and they have to pair female names with words like um, concerned and supportive, and male names with words like individualistic and competitive. And people who are tested this way in research studies usually find it easier. That's easier to do than the opposite pairing: female names with words like aggressive or individualistic and competitive. And that's not something that people are doing consciously. It's just, it really takes them longer to do that. It's called the implicit association test. So, like it or not, we've all been there. We all have these associations that we may not consciously endorse them. Learning these associations takes place without the need for this awareness, intention, or control. And making these associations, to say that, well, women are really nurturing, making these associations is indiscriminate. The mind and memory pick up and respond to cultural patterns in society, media, and advertising. So one of the things that I hear is in these kind of meetings is women saying, "I've never been brainwashed. I haven't been brainwashed." I don't like to use the word brainwashed, but if that's the word we're going to use, then the entire world has been brainwashed, really, because we have these beliefs, and this is what this book is about. We have these beliefs as cultural constructs. And these are the real cultural constructs. A penis and vagina aren't. So there was a series of experiments at University of Massachusetts about these implicit beliefs. And I'm trying to read, but it's 4 a.m. here, so it's kind of dark. The researchers looking at counter stereotypic information. They would give one group of women a series of short biographies of famous women, leaders like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or woman Meg Whitman, who was then the CEO of eBay. And afterward, the women who read these found it easier to pair female names with those leadership words, like being in charge and things like that, compared with the control group who had not just read about these women leaders. And the same thing occurred when they compared over a year's time women who went to a co-ed college versus the women's college. They started off the same, but at the end of it, the women who went to the women's college were much easier to make associations between female names. It's just female names on a test and things like, being individual, determined, and things like that. we excuse me, we even perceive ourselves through the activation of these stereotypes, and we interact and respond to situations with the relevant components of ourselves. That this is, I'm a this kind of person, or I'm a that kind of person. But a lot of it is because I should be this kind of person or that kind of person. So a lot of the components of ourselves, a lot of the ways we react, are stereotypically based perceptions that are sensitive to context. She talks about another study. High school students asked to rate the truth of stereotypes about gender differences in talent in math and the arts before rating their own abilities in these domains. So for these students, gender stereotypes were very important as they rated their own ability. And then they were asked to report their scores in math and the arts on a test that they had taken a year earlier. So unlike students in a control condition, those in the stereotype group altered the memory of their own achievements for the well-known stereotype. The girls remembered doing better than they really had in the arts, while the boys inflated their marks in math and gave themselves, extra points. And things that you would think, well, how could that possibly make a difference? Make a huge difference. They took students were given a test. University students were given a test to rate their mathematical and verbal abilities. And one group at the top, at the beginning of the test, had to check off male or female, and the control group, that wasn't there on the page. Really simple process of checking a box had surprising effects. Women felt more confident about their verbal skills when they checked off that they were female, and rated their math ability lower. And it was vice versa with the men. So this is, I mean, this seems pretty imperceptible that could make a difference, but it does. We change our behavior to match someone else's stereotypical perception of us. And we do that from the beginning of our lives. Being told that a man is a charming sexist. There was this one test where women were told that he was either a charming benevolent sexist, or he was just a really nasty guy. But when women were told, this was a charming sexist, women regarded themselves as more stereotypically feminine when they were asked. When people are given photos of people, they were, it was a cheerleader or a professor or something else. They had to write about a typical day for that person. In the first person, where they are the person in the photo, and in the third person, which is more detached. And then they rated themselves. When they wrote about themselves as a first person, like the person in the photo, it didn't affect how they did better rather on tasks associated with the person in the photos. Like if somebody had to write a story about how I am a cheerleader, they would rate themselves as more friendly, outgoing, vivacious, verbal ability. If they had to write a story about themselves as a professor, they would rate themselves as more intellectual, more perceptive, more logical. And that didn't happen where they had to, where with the group that had to write themselves, had to write a story about these being some other people and not themselves. And then she talks about, Sheila's just mentioning men are from Mars, women are from Venus. One of the things that one of the gender differences that is very, very important, and I hope this is like not getting too classroomy, so anybody who wants to, please feel free to make a joke about the teacher. I really want this to be like interesting. She talks about testing for empathy versus systematizing. Empathy being just the ability to intuit what someone else is thinking or feeling. That's cognitive empathy. Affective is when you actually want to go do something to help that person. Systematizing is the interest or ability in math, tables of information, repairing your home, things like that. So when people filled out a questionnaire assessing their empathy and their systematizing, some were told that they were being measured on their own empathy, and the others, the control group, weren't told that. When people were told that they were being measured on how empathetic they were, the women described themselves having a very high empathetic quotient, that they were very empathetic, but that they weren't very systematic. They didn't systematize, and it was completely the reverse in males. The control group, where they were not told that they were being measured on how empathetic they were, males and females describe themselves the same in terms of empathy and systematizing. And there are other studies that she goes into where people cannot reliably predict their own empathetic ability as measured on how they say they would react in certain situations. More studies, again, whenever people were told to assess how good they were at reading others, in terms of knowing what other people were feeling, women said they were more accurate, and men declared themselves very inaccurate and clueless. There was no difference, though, if they weren't asked how good they were. When they were just asked, what do you think this person is feeling, men and women did about the same. When they were asked, it was a reminder to women that we are supposed to be good at reading feelings, and to men that they aren't supposed to be good at it. So pick a gender difference, any difference, one that seems to be definitively hardwired in the brain. What do you think is hardwired in the brain? Well, this classic test that's used to measure supposed brain differences between men and women is called the mental rotation performance, where the test taker is shown an object, a three-dimensional shape made up of little cubes, and four other similar shapes. Two of the similar shapes are the same as the original, but just have been rotated in three-dimensional space. And two of them are mirror images. They're not the same, and the task is to work out which two are the same as the target. And this test, actually, mental rotation performance, is the largest and most reliable gender difference in cognition. In a typical sample, about 75% of people who score above average are male. Gender differences in mental rotation ability have even recently been seen in babies 3 to 4 months of age. But gender-based performance can be changed by context, even in something like this mental rotation test, which you would think is just really hardwired in the brain, because they said they feminized the task. In one study, participants were told that the performance on mental rotation is probably linked with success on such tasks as in-flight and carrier-based aviation engineering, nuclear propulsion engineering, and so on. And the men came out way ahead. However, when the same test was described as predicting facility for clothing and dress design, interior decoration and interior design, and so forth, this was viewed as apparently emasculating, and the men's performance on the mental rotation task really bottomed out. So, let me see where I am. Oh, there's a dude in here. Dude, leave. Another change of context is well, there's more about the mental rotation test, and just tons and tons of stuff like that. It's called priming, gender stereotype priming. Gender stereotype priming, and there was the same effects showed. And there was the same thing was seen with a math test, where one group was told that men do better, and a control group was told that there was no difference between men and women. And when the group that was told that men do better, men did better. The other group where they were told there was no difference, women did the same or better than the men. And if a group was told nothing at all, having to check a box, they're told nothing at all, but they have to check that box against male or female, well, that changed things again. Men did better. And then she talks about testosterone, and she wrote another book called Testosterone Rex, I guess about 5 or 6 years after this, which is also worth reading. There is research about performance on math tests for high T, men and women who have high testosterone and low testosterone for their sex. High testosterone people, both men and women, did worse on cognitive tasks when placed in low status positions or when threatened with loss of status. They do better when given situational opportunities to enhance their status. So the meaning of this is unclear. She does note that some researchers predicted that because women with high testosterone are more concerned with their status, they will be particularly vulnerable to stereotype threat. And it's unclear why women with high testosterone would react the same as men, but it sure makes it seem like it's hardwired, doesn't it? But negative stereotypes about a group's ability to create a mismatch between her desire for high status and low status is held to be important in why women react the way they do. High testosterone women react the way they do. That I know was a little bit unclear, and it was unclear to me too, but it will become clearer as we go along. In the next couple of chapters, there's a lot of studies on giving men and women a math test, and afterward, men thinking that they did better on the test than women. Women thought that they did worse, but on average, men did better. But individually, the men thought they got higher scores than they did. As a group, the men did better, but individual men thought they got higher scores than they did. Without, men still overrated themselves, but women did not underrate themselves. Okay, if they had to check off, and that's if they had to check off male versus female. If when men were reminded they were men, they overrated themselves. If they did not have to check it off, the men, like I said, still overrated themselves, but women did not underrate themselves. And the men did better as a class, but women did better as a class also if they were not reminded that they were women. In the workplace, she talks about, workplace and socially excluding women from promotion opportunities at work, business. I'm aware that that preceding part was a little complicated because some of these tests have long, complicated descriptions, and you will want to read the book. But there's findings that show that, when men are reminded that they're men, they think they're better at the stuff that men are supposed to be better at. When they're not reminded, the differences really are not as sharp or present at all. But we have other opportunities to to remind women that we're women and should be a certain way and not other ways, excluding women from promotion. And one of the things that and I think Sheila has written about this in some book is that in business, entertaining clients at strip clubs, topless bars, taking clients to play golf is something that men participate in a lot, and it's a very male bonding thing. And it's very, very hard for women in the workplace to overcome this, participate in this and make it work for them. There was also sexual harassment in the workplace. She also talks about moving from the workplace to the home, and gender equality begins at the home. And it's about having a genuinely egalitarian heterosexual marriage, and is that possible? And what could that actually be like? And she said she talks about that you have heard the saying that the personal is political, but that her experience is that the personal is a political means that the school drop-off is the political. The staying home when the kids are sick is the political. The writing of the shopping list is political. The buying of the birthday presents is political. Arranging of the babysitter is political. Packing the lunch boxes is political. Thinking about what to have for dinner is political. Remembering the need to cut the children's toenails is political. You get the idea. And that is why I think this is why it has little nuggets in here that are really important when we're thinking about a radical feminist analysis, because that's a really concrete example of things that seem kind of very pedestrian day to day, but really are part of what we mean saying the personal is political. And I heard a woman in a consciousness raising group once talking about day-to-day tasks, and other women talked, and I think that was the topic, is the day-to-day tasks, and it was all those little things. The personal is political. Some people try to justify why tasks should be split by sex. Somebody mentioned the book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. He said that these tasks should be split by sex because the modern working woman has removed herself from her traditional home sphere with babies, children, and friends on whom to call with a pot roast. She has dangerously low levels of oxytocin coursing through her blood, which is a hormone associated with social bonding and social interactions. Thankfully, however, nurturing oxytocin-producing domestic routines like laundry, shopping, cooking, and cleaning are available in plentiful supply. Well, isn't that good? And so for and such chores, John Gray says, it has a very ill effect on men, because for them, the priority is testosterone-producing tasks, because without the rush of that stimulating sex hormone, men become a little better than limp rags, and not even ones that wipe themselves along the countertops. This is testosterone doesn't do that. Testosterone doesn't cause aggression. Testosterone suppresses the part of the frontal lobe that when you are told you should get worked up and you should attack the enemy and you're entitled to this, testosterone suppresses the part of your brain saying, maybe I shouldn't flip out and be a jerk. Testosterone suppresses that part of the brain. But it doesn't cause the social effect of like, you're a guy, you should be doing this. Oxytocin does indeed cause bonding. It's notorious when you have a brand new baby. I mean, how cool is a brand new baby? Everybody feels like brand new baby. And men secrete oxytocin as well. Women secrete more of it. but it's not like men don't have it at all. And then she gets to the part of the book called neurosexism. There's a common belief that the fetal testosterone surge in the first trimester, between 6 to 8 weeks, organizes the brain in a masculine way, which includes things that this embryo is going to be good at math and logical instead of empathetic and submissive. And then after puberty, testosterone on males, so the theory goes, activates circuits throughout this masculinized brain for further development of male traits. She does talk about some studies with animals giving female zebrafish male hormones, and then and then the females start to sing, instead of just the male singing. If you castrate male rats at birth, they are similar in females to running mazes and fighting and aggression, but it doesn't make them the opposite sex, and it doesn't extrapolate to humans. So you have to be very aware. And this is something when we get studies thrown at us, things that you really need to think about when you're interpreting those things. Yeah, so zebrafinch, you give female zebrafinch testosterone and they sing, but it doesn't make them males. It just means that they are female zebrafinch who are singing. What actually happens with testosterone in utero? Well, at 6 to 7 weeks, the embryo that is already a male and has an SRY gene on the Y chromosome develops testes, penis, male, sexual characteristics. And then at week 8, the testes start producing testosterone. You will hear, somebody saying, well, having a penis doesn't make you male. No, not per se. When you were conceived, if your father had a Y-bearing sperm, which fertilized your mother's ovum, which is always an X, at that point you became a male. And then later on you have a penis because you developed a penis because you were already a male. Then there's some interesting stuff. Let's see. This is where she starts really going into the idea that it's more than just what happens biologically. That the characteristics are not inbred. And one investigator looked at rats. Rat mothers, all right, this may seem gross, but bear with me. Rat mothers lick the anus and genitals of their newly born pups. And the researcher noticed that male pups are licked more than females. The researchers discovered that the reason for this is that mothers are attracted by the higher levels of testosterone in the urine of the male pups. When he blocked the mother's noses, they licked male and female pups equally, and female pups injected with testosterone were licked as often as their brothers. But most remarkable of all was the effect of this anogenital licking on the young rats' brains. When he stimulated the anogenital region of untampered with female rats, the penis innervating nucleus in the brainstem got bigger, although not as big as the nucleus of a male rat. In other words, the sex difference in the part of the brain responsible for this, licking response was not just due to neonatal testosterone, but was also influenced by the different maternal treatment of male and female pups. A little complicated, helps to read the book, but the idea is that he saw this response that seems completely hardwired and biological, but was actually able to change it by just stimulating the anus of female pups with a paintbrush or something. So it's more than hormones. It's more than just hormones. And then he talks about the phenomenon of congenital adrenal congenital adrenal hypertrophy. Anyway, CAH. Oh, here we go. Congenital adrenal hyperplasia. Sorry, CAH. The child. I'm looking at something else in the book. See, this is fun. This is a fun class. The instructor is reading the wrong thing, but now I'm reading the right thing. So CAH, the child's genetic state, results in the fetus as being exposed to unusually high levels of testosterone. In girls with CAH, this triggers development of male external genitalia, but the female internal reproductive organs, however, develop normally. Girls with CAH are born with genital virilization. That is, they look more or less like a boy at birth. They do not develop a penis. They do not develop an organ where semen, which they don't produce and will never produce, come out of a urethra in a penis. They just develop very, very enlarged clitorises, sometimes not so enlarged, that will look like, oh my, that's a penis, although it isn't. So usually the condition is detected at birth, and then the child's given ongoing hormonal treatment, and sometime later undergoes surgery to feminize her genitalia and is raised as a girl. But the other factor in it is that these girls tend to prefer or boy toys that boys like, or neutral toys. There's lots of studies, lots of additional studies of this. Female hormones predisposing these girls with CAH to be receptive to whatever behaviors happen to go with their own sex in the particular society in which they are born. Different behaviors in males and females for infants and childcare, this choice of toys, all kinds of studies on this, showing that the fetal hormones don't make you take on male versus female behaviors, but that make you receptive. And this is in animals, make them receptive to just take and in retrospective studies in humans, they don't give humans experiment with giving them hormones. Well, now we are, but it makes them receptive to whatever behaviors happen to go with their own sex. There's studies on different behaviors in males and females for infants and childcare, choice of toys, all kinds of stuff like that. And there are no consistent results, except that you can change these behaviors. You can take animals and people, if you look retrospectively at it without experimenting on them, and look at different hormone levels, but you can change how they actually behave based on how they're treated. So when you're looking at these studies, these research studies, and we get tossed these all the time. It's like, I say, well, what about this study? First of all, what is it actually measuring objectively? What is it measuring? Is it correlating, or is it implying causation? Is it extrapolating to analogous settings? And is it speculating about something? A lot of the studies that we'll get that say, see, there really is female brain, there really is male brain. You look at those studies, and I make a living at seeing how valid studies are or aren't. Nearly every study that you'll get shown to prove gender ideologues' viewpoint is really just an editorial speculative study and not actually research studies at all. So I like the name of this chapter, Sex and Premature Speculation. A neurologist in 1915 said that there are some fundamental differences between the body, the bony and nervous structures of women and men. The brainstem of women is relatively larger. The brain mantle and basal ganglia are smaller. Upper half of the spinal cord, and he goes on for several things. These are structural differences which underlie definite differences in the two sexes. I do not say that they will prevent a woman from voting, but they will prevent her from ever becoming a man. And they point the way to the fact that women's efficiency lies in a special field and not that of the political initiative or of judicial authority in a community's organization. There may be an answer to this assertion, but no one can deny that the mean weight of, and he referred to some measurements of the skull, in a man is 42 and in a woman is 38. and that there's a significant difference in the pelvic girdle. Well, yeah, there really are differences in how we are physically. And I don't know about the exact differences he measured, because we have better measurements now of what physical characteristics are. The bony skull, for example. Men, have the brow. This is why the LARPing men want to get surgery. The brow ridge in the jaw, and a lot of different things. And somebody in the chat is saying that they're skeptical about studies on rats or fruit flies that is supposed to explain to us something about human beings. And you should be skeptical. And that's that's one of the points being made here, is that no one study is definitive. If you put together a lot of these studies, though, and look at what they're all saying en masse, you can extrapolate certain specific things from each group of studies that may tell us about what's also happening in humans. Let's see, and when you read studies, just as a point of interest, in the statistical jargon used in these studies, P, you see a P, refers to the probability that the difference you see between two groups, say introverts and extroverts, males or females, could have occurred by chance. As a general rule, scientists report a difference between two groups as significant if the probability that it could have occurred by chance is 1 in 20 or less. The possibility of getting significant results by chance is a problem in any area of research, but it's particularly acute for sex differences research. Suppose, for example, you're a neuroscientist interested in what parts of the brain are involved in mind reading. You get 15 participants into a scanner, then ask them to guess the emotion of people in photographs. And since you have both males and females in your group, you run a quick check to ensure that the two groups' brains respond in the same way. And they do. So what do you do next? Well, most likely you publish your results without mentioning gender at all in your report. Sex, she uses gender for sex sometimes, except to note the number of male and female participants. What you don't do is publish your findings with the title, "No sex differences in neural circuitry involved in understanding others' minds." This is perfectly reasonable. After all, you weren't looking for sex differences, and there were only small numbers of each sex in your study. But remember that even if males and females overall respond the same way on a task, 5% of the studies investigating this question will throw up the significance between the sexes by chance, which is really, really important to know. It's just more interesting to find a difference due to sex than to find no differences. So those 19 out of 20 studies that show no differences don't get reported, don't get published, and the 1 in 20 that does show a difference does get reported and published. But now we have neuroimaging, right? A couple of things about those neuroimaging scans. People say, well, functional MRI, we have functional MRI now. That doesn't directly measure neuronal activity. It just uses changes in blood oxygen levels as a proxy for that. When something is happening in that part of the brain, there's more blood flow. Same thing with PET scanning. The radioactive tracer isotope attaches itself to glucose or water molecules to indirectly track blood flow. But neuroimaging is very expensive. So all those studies really have very small sample sizes. Any difference in results between, males and females still need correct situational analysis. And it's critical not to place too much faith in a single study that shows sex differences, but instead to look for a consistent pattern. And why are we concerned about sex differences? Well, we're concerned about sex differences in the brain, saying that, male brain and female brain. And none of the data so far really shows that there's a significant difference between male brain and female brain. You will see that sometimes a lot of studies are looked at once. It's called a meta-analysis, and this is a statistical technique. Trust me, I'm not going to mention that. I love math, but statistics. Meta-analysis is a set of statistical techniques that put together all studies that have investigated a particular question, taking into account the size of a study to get a more accurate overall picture of the empirical situation. So meta-analysis can be applied to studies of brain lateralization, for example, left side of the brain versus the right side of the brain. The left hemisphere is less developed and less active in males, and that's the hemisphere that has to do with language understanding, language usage. The right hemisphere is not dedicated to, but centered around visual spatial stimuli. And the part in between is the corpus callosum, which connects the two, which is supposedly bigger in females, although it turns out it isn't, usually significantly bigger for the most part. There are lots of studies about sex differences in abilities and activities, about the hemispheres and tasks requiring coordination of both hemispheres. And there's no significant differences. Any studies that found sex differences tended to have the very smallest sample sizes, which is really, really important. So many studies, especially those purporting to say, well, this male brain, female brain, have these minuscule sample sizes. So all this applies, all this applies to other study parameters where you have to take all the studies into account. There can be poor statistical analyses. There can be cherry picking of studies. You want to make sure that a meta-analysis or any analysis is not cherry picking studies. And there is speculative interpretation about what the findings mean. And Cordelia Fine talks about that. For example, brain weight. That's related to the size of a person, a whole person, and the size of their head. Body muscle mass. Less body muscle mass was assumed to mean that you got fatigued with increased brain activity and differences in the brain. It's assumed that these differences must be the cause of different behaviors. But most brain functions arise from distributed neural networks. It's not just like one piece of the brain. It's how this part of the brain relates to this part, and it's incredibly complex networks. So gender ideologues point to this complexity of biology, and it is complex, but understanding it makes it clear that no one can change sex, and that there is no gendered brain. There's this just amazing complexity in male or female bodies, and no credible evidence that female brains can reside in male bodies or male bodies in female brains. One thing that she talks about is the concept of reverse inference, which is inferring a psychological state from brain activity, saying that because the brain has more blood flow here at this point, this person must be feeling or thinking XYZ. Fine said she also read a lot of popular books about gender differences. She did a lot of research for this. She's read an incredible amount. And she said that she came up with four basic pieces of advice for anyone considering incorporating neuroscientific findings into a popular book or article about gender. Number one, unless you have a time machine and have visited a future in which neuroscientists can make these reverse inferences without the nagging anxieties that keep the more thoughtful of them awake at night, do not suggest that parents or teachers should treat their boys and girls differently because of differences observed in their brains. Number two, if you don't know what a reverse inference is, read the previous chapter of this book. And what it meant is like, well, this is what happens in the brain, so the child must be feeling XYZ. Number three, exercise extreme caution when making the perilous leap from brain structure to psychological function. And four, don't make stuff up. So the conclusion of researchers in brain imaging studies that look at behaviors project gender stereotypes onto brain data. And she's, I can't stress strongly enough that this is something that she found just kept happening and happening and happening. Well, this is in the brain, so this, this must be why, this other, this creates a stereotype. This is very, very important, arguing for social and legal policies that affect girls and women. For example, girls do better in single-sex schools. We can observe this. This is something that we can see. But there's a difference between arguing this based on neuroscience. Remember the studies or the reverse inference saying, well, the girls have these kinds of brains and this is why they do better. And it's like, no, there's a difference between that versus arguing based on a radical feminist class analysis that relies on the also observable material reality of boys and men generating sexual harassment, dominating behavior, and disrespect towards girls and women. Those are two very different arguments and come up with two very different solutions. So when it comes to genes, she says, you get what you get, but gene activity is another story. You may have heard of the term of epigenetics, and if you haven't, all it means is that genes switch on and off depending on what else is going on. Our environment, our behavior, and even our thinking can all change when genes are expressed or not. So why do people, and then the stuff at the end is really probably the most interesting. Why do people think their kids sometimes behave in sex-type ways, even when the parents are trying to raise the kids gender neutral? Parents see their young children behaving in stereotypically boyish or girlish ways and assume that only something immutable could intervene between their gender neutral efforts and the gendered outcomes they witness. The obstacles to gender neutral parenting. Say you want to, where you say that I raise my kids the same, boys and girls, or I want to, but the obstacle to this kind of parenting begins well before a baby is born. One researcher asked her sample of parents about their preferences for sons or daughters before they even became parents, before they, even the mother even became pregnant. And the themes of their responses showed that they had gendered expectations of even hypothetical children. The men tended to want a son, a common reason being that they liked the idea of teaching him to play sports. I always wanted a son. I think that's just a normal thing for a guy to want. I wanted to teach my son to play basketball, to play baseball, and so forth. Just thinking of all the things you could do with your son was how one father put it. The same researcher also found that if mothers wanted a son, it was to provide their husbands with a companion with whom to do things like sports that apparently couldn't be done with girls. Daughters, by contrast, were expected to offer very different kinds of parental experiences. Women would say, as a girl, I wanted that more, to dress her up and to buy the dolls and, the dance classes. A girl was someone that you could do all those things that you like to do with more than you could a boy. More often, though, girls were wanted because of the emotional connection they would provide. Only a daughter would be naturally inclined to emotional intimacy and the remembering of birthdays and the unspoken assumptions. Not yet conceived, and already the sons were off the hook for remembering to call or send birthday flowers. And she also notes that among the women who did not know the sex of their baby, another study with women who did not know the sex of their baby while they were pregnant, there was no particular pattern to the way that the baby was described, in utero. Women who, would describe all the babies as active. But as soon as the woman knew the sex of her unborn baby, suddenly she would start to be describing his activity as vigorous and strong. And the female activity was then started to be described in gentler terms. Not violent, not excessively energetic, not terribly active. This is what terms that were used for females. Another thing that was surprisingly gendered was birth announcements. One study analyzed several hundred of them for 400 or 500 or more birth announcements, and it analyzed them for expressions of happiness and pride. Parents of boys tended to express pride. We're proud to announce. Parents of girls expressed more happiness. We're happy to announce. It may seem like a small thing, but it's that's, how does that happen? That's like really a difference. People are also somewhat more likely to place birth announcements for boys than girls. A greater percentage of people placed birth announcements when it was a boy rather than a girl. Odd other things that that really, and these are all things that like, oh, this is all inborn. It's like, no, this is stuff that's there in our brains because we were socialized into it and we socialize our kids into it. Boys are more likely to be given a name that begins with the same letter of the alphabet as the father's name. And that did not occur with girls at all. So babies are really unequal even before conception. This is not conscious though. It's a non-conscious manifestation of sex role stereotypes, and sexism for the way boys are treated. So much, nearly all, maybe all of what we think is innate and hardwired isn't. It just isn't. There's no credible evidence for it. For example, one researcher found that babies just 3 or 4 months of age prefer to look at female rather than male faces. This is not hardwired in because the researchers wondered why. Maybe this is because the babies had spent most of the time with female caregivers, and that greater familiarity with female faces was the reason they liked them more. So they tested a group of babies who'd been strictly reared by their fathers, and found that this breed of baby preferred male faces. A further experiment suggested that babies' preferences for faces of the more familiar sex stems from acquired expertise with those kinds of faces. As a baby, a newborn baby, only seeing females versus males is already being socialized into preferring female or male faces. Babies are also, even in the first year of life, sensitive to the emotional reactions of caregivers. They use facial expressions and tone of voice as a guide to what toys, for example, should be approached, and especially what should be avoided. People, they did research where they had the adults, with their babies, suggesting certain toys and using certain tones of voice, and it worked to change which toys the babies preferred. Infants actually found that mixed messages, even those that included some sort of positive expression toward a toy, somewhat off-putting. They found that even among 6 months old, up to 6 months old, the youngest, which is a very young age group to study, boys had more toys of the world, like transportation vehicles and machines, while girls had more toys of the home, like dolls and housekeeping toys. So the toys, some of this comes under the heading of no shit, Sherlock is in the chat, but there are some people that don't believe this. There are some people who believe that, well, my boys have trucks because that's what boys prefer. No, your boys have trucks because that's what you gave them. Parents treat kids differently from birth, as we've seen, and even before birth in a way. Toys, interactions. There are multiple similar studies showing that all the sex type behaviors that parents insist is inborn isn't at all. It's induced. It's created by parents' expectations of gender. The gendered patterns of our lives can be so familiar that we no longer notice them, Fine says, and she says even, this can happen even if you're trying to be egalitarian in the home. One study, for example, found that mothers conversed and interacted more with girl babies and young toddlers, even when they were young, despite the fact that boys were no less responsive to their mother's speech. Many studies like this. We're running out of time, so there's a lot more I could be reading. And there are studies also on kids being unwilling to break sex-typed expectations, most of which are unwritten rules. Kids who feel like they should act one way and kind of like, look suspiciously over at their parents. It's like, this is right, this is right, this is right. In a classic study, children were shown a video of men and women playing a game, with the men performing one kind of ritual action, and the women another. Girls copied what the women were doing, and boys copied what the men were doing, but only after they had confirmed for themselves this is what women or men in general did, and not just one particular woman or man. They they would look around and see what are all the men doing, what are all the women doing. So a parent, no matter how loving or loved, cannot be a model for appropriate gender behavior unless the child's exposure to the wider world, friendship groups and the media, suggests that the parent is a representative prototypical male or female. So we are sexualized from birth into sexual stereotypes. There's no credible evidence that any of it is innate. And I mean, I just read like a sampling. There's tons more studies in there. And somebody just ordered the book. Yay, Cordelia, fine. So our kids are socialized by us. It's never true to say that a boy is that way because that's how boys are, or even that's how this particular boy is, or that a girl is that way because that's how girls are, or that's how this particular girl is. We do this. This is socialization. This is not innate. There is no evidence for it. I encourage you to read the book. Not the, and again, this is a real departure from what we usually do, but I think it's really, really important. And I think it's pertinent to radical feminism because gendered behavior and roles are not hardwired into the brain, so that there is no essential male brain or female brain, which is so much a part of what is so contentious now. And if we want to maintain that, oh, this is hardwired in, we don't really have an argument because A, the evidence doesn't support us, and B, that's what the Transborg is saying, is that, well, it's hardwired into me. I may have a penis and a prostate, but by gosh, I have a hardwired female brain. No, you don't. Are there any questions in the Q&A, and I've seen some questions in the chat as we've been going along, and there are still, and I know there are still women, in the group here today that are saying, well, no, I just don't believe it because I just, just read the book, and lots of stuff in there. It's actually pretty readable. It's not a oh, there's a question in the Q&A. How do you explain the fact that even when they are given dolls to play with, some girls are not interested in these toys and prefer other kind of toys? Same thing for how do you explain early resistance to parental gender formatting? That's what some of the studies showed, that, for example, the way toys are presented, even as insignificant thing as a nod of the head, or smiling or not smiling, or just a lot of cues, and it starts really, really early. There are a number of studies on that, and kids are played with even differently as infants, boys being bounced more, and given toys earlier. And the other thing was the study that talked about fighting against the wider culture, that is it okay for boys to want to play with these dolls or not? So there are just a ton of studies, and I only touched on some of them, and you can watch again for references to them. But I would encourage you to read the book because it's a lot of really unconscious cues that even newborn babies are given. All right. Okay. Oh, there's another question. I have a minute to answer it. Natural, if something is natural, it follows that it is good or correct. There are a lot of behavioral tendencies within, but there's no reason to follow them. Something is a built-in. What does it matter if something is a built-in tendency? It matters because if we say that that women are oppressed on the basis of gender, and if gender is built in and natural, then there's nothing we can do about it, and why bother? But if we know that we are oppressed on the basis of gender, and this is something that is the social construct, that we fight it in a different way, and we know that we can fight it and should fight it. And that's why it matters to us as radical feminists. And I think we're about out of time. All right. Yeah, we're out of time. It was great to be here today. I enjoyed talking about it.